Hello, everybody. My name is Kevin Kotchek. I'm the founder CEO of ChemicalQDevice. This is episode 66 and January 19th, 2023. So I'm going to go over a lot of the FDA radiology / neurology approvals, some of the quantum stuff that goes with it, or it's going to come off it likely, and so slide 2. Okay, so the big key is basically regulation. So you can develop everything in quantum that you want, but unless you understand what's going on with IEC, ISO, and then in the medical world with FDA, so FDA is going to likely require, these upcoming regulations. So the current ones are all quantum key distribution. That's the focus. So if you see this point A, is the 2387371, and the -2 are requirements, evaluation, and testing for quantum security. So this you'll hear a lot with the White House. There's a law that requires, basically all federal agency to employ this, I think within a given period of time, like 6 months, something like that. Now, I'm going to focus on today the FDA AI ML medical device approvals. So in specific, this October was a big month, and they made a big update to it, over 100 approvals to it. I'm going to focus primarily, I focused on 192. I'll show you my Prisma that I used in selection, and in specific, which ones will have the greatest impact on emerging quantum technologies. Now, as you can see, the framework is going to be pending to go forward with any type of thing with quantum with these regulatory bodies. But of course, the quantum parallel and exponential potential is always out there if, the qubits remain going higher and then the noise keeps going lower. And then also being used for large data sets as well. So as you can see, so these are a couple quotes that are on FDA sites. So they say AI, ML, so this is artificial intelligence, machine learning technologies, have the potential to transform healthcare by deriving new and important insights from the vast amount of data generated during the delivery of healthcare every day. Medical device manufacturers use AI ML to innovate their products to better assist healthcare providers and improve patient care. And lastly, AI ML benefits in its ability to learn from real world use and experience, and its capability to improve its performance. So again, all these quotes are, conventional computing, CPUs, GPUs, those types of things. Now in specific, the reason why I took a closer look at all of this is basically there's an Alzheimer's disease. So this is basically dementia. You have blood and cerebral spinal fluid tests that are not ever going to reach the complexity of brain imaging. So that's a benefit. And moving forward with quantum technologies is basically, this unexplored area of, doubling information every additional qubit that you have. The potential is there. It's just, getting the quantum computer. And towards the end, I'll focus a little bit more on that. Now, the competitive advantage with ChemicalQDevice is in these reviews. So this is basically my third time. This is kind of like a full, I looked at basically, all, if not most of these, the ones that were relevant. Substantial equivalency to predicate devices. Who knows? Maybe it's not quite as hard to, because a lot of these, if I look at them closer, sometimes there's a little bit of difference between a previous device and the ones that want to gain approval. And also these trending. So the trends back in the day, EEG and electroencephalography. So everybody's familiar with that. And you don't hear too much about it in the approvals these days. And then also these standards, transitioning not just solely in security and hopefully towards medical. Now, the limitations in the study is basically some of these, the indications for use is what they call them. It's a paragraph, a very useful paragraph. You have to scroll down a couple pages to get to it. And some of them are in image format. And it makes it difficult as far as you want to, select certain parts of it, and then you have to transcribe basically, or just look at it and then, learn from it, and then move it to where you want it to. Some minor format changes, but nothing too bad since 1995. So again, these are artificial intelligence, machine learning, FDA approvals. Some of them are hardware-based, a lot of them are software. So we're talking software as medical device. Now, ISO in specific, International Organization for Standardization, is the leading, or one of the, if not the leading, as far as standards. Now, they have this interesting term that they use. It's distributed ledger technology, artificial intelligence, extended reality, and quantum computing. And they call these the dark technologies with a Q. And dark technologies will power the innovation and opportunity uniquely associated with the coming post-digital era. Business landscape is becoming increasingly dominated by digital natives and companies. I was just surprised, like, how aware they are and moving with quantum. Now, here's an example of this first one. This one is basically ISO IEC DIS 4879. And it's just a basic thing for quantum computing terminology and vocabulary. So we can have discussion a little bit later on this, but basically, it seems like a lot of the hardware is kind of settling down. It just needs to get better, as opposed to just the new technology popping up. So neutral atoms common, and gate-based superconducting qubit, ion trap, these types of things. But this is just to lay things down. Now, how they do it, so these two different regulatory bodies, is if it's at 40, it's inquiry, and at 50, it's approval. So it's actually not that far away, but then it still has to go through publication and review, then hopefully not withdrawal. So you can see here, so this is ISO IEC DIS 23837-1. So in specific, this is quantum key distribution. So this one's a little bit further along. So it's a 40.6, getting up to 50 for approval. So I'll show you in the next slide of all of this lining up with the White House order that it's a law that federal organizations need to be able to defend against quantum. So all of this is going to bring an awareness of the technology, and in many different levels, before it starts going into, say, life sciences, physical science, healthcare. And then here's the analogous one. So quantum key distribution, evaluation and testing methods, and it too is at 40.6. And I included on that lower right hand, it says the federal government is to adopt a technology that is protected from decryption by quantum computing. So that was last December, so 12/22. And then, so this is the joint, basically the IEC, or International Electrotechnical Commission, is international standards for all electrical, electronic, and related technologies. So that just rings quantum technologies, quantum computing, the algorithms, I think other ones do it too, but, this is a huge thing, working with ISO and this JTC1, this collaboration. Now, what I did here, so these are the 521 total approvals the FDA.gov has up. It's the AI ML enabled medical devices. And then I removed 115. So these are just non, brain related, neurology, radiology. And a lot of these, it seems like the trend is just to post into radiology. So, if it fits that category, as opposed to some of these other ones. So of the 406 on the left here, 392 radiology, 14 neurology, and I removed 215 that, they're just some just general ultrasounds, things not directly related to, say, brain, head, or skull. And I included 191. So of these 191, I'll show you that I'm narrowing down as far as these things that could, potentially impact quantum technologies, especially imaging, quantum medical imaging. Now, here's an example of one. It's somebody else's mail. It's public. It's online, and it's the FDA addressing this company to somebody, at that address. Now, if you look here, so the K stands for, it's not denovo. It's, the easiest one, 510K to get into it. And, so regulation number, everything, is assigned a certain thing. It's important to see most, if not all of these, are considered class 2. So it's basically, it's not having immediate, impact on a patient. Very few are class 1, but most of these are 510K or de novo. And here's the indication for use. So like I said, some of these are in image format, so you can't copy them. Not a huge deal. But this is where you get the bulk of the information. And then this is the predicate device. So this gives additional information. So you scroll down. So your submission is the A promise X, and you're comparing it to the A promise 1.2.1, and then you're on the right-hand corner, you're giving a comparison. I've seen it with up to 2 other predicate devices, a standard device. It can get kind of complicated. But that's the whole goal, is try not to get a de novo. It's just a longer process. 510K is more streamlined. Now, with abbreviations, some of this, for some of you might be pretty familiar. On the top are everything, so if you reference back to this is more like the AI, ML kind of stuff. The middle is a bunch of the medical, and then the bottom is what we're seeing more often, quantum machine learning, quantum neural network. Now we have something going on with the QNN because people don't want to call it a QCNN, a quantum convolutional neural network. So they're calling it a quanvolutional neural network. So you have to be aware of that little notation there, the difference between convolutional or convolutional or not. Now, my first principle that I found is basically deep learning reconstruction algorithms have become common. Now, deep learning meaning that you're greater than 3, basically series into, your programming. And you can see this with GE Healthcare, deep learning algorithm for head CT, Canon Medical, deep convolutional neural network. So this would be a DCNN for reduced noise. And, all these are reconstruction. So this is in the image formation stage. After you detect, from the patient, you're turning that raw data into an image form. And at that same time, you can make it better, denoise, demotion, those types of things. And also you see this, June 2022, reduced scan time and improved quality for GE. Principle number 2 is segmentation. So automatic and semi-automatic segmentation. Segmentation is in image computing, and it's further down. So after your image is formed through reconstruction and the raw data, is now you're at the with these segmenters. So first one, hyperfine and annotated segmented images and reports. Therapanacea, so segmentation, generate, visualize, evaluate, modify. C is automated segmentation. So you'll see this as automated processes. That was one of the key things, is basically neurologists is getting caught up with segmentation. It's a challenging step. Now, principle number 3 is basically MRI has reduced in size while maintaining adequate performance. So this portable bedside, I featured on this discussion before, it's 1,400 pounds, but it rolls up to the patient bedside. It's just for the head. And I believe since the magnet is a lot closer than, say, like a traditional 3 Tesla MRI, that it overcomes that with being portable, because it can get closer. It's an interesting looking device. Now, GE Healthcare MRI hit resolution and signal noise ratio with those 2 are higher with shortened scan times. So that's like, in a nutshell, people don't want to wait 30 minutes, 45 minutes for an MRI time, or MRI, to go through all these scans, and you want higher resolution, better signal to noise ratio. Now, the quant BV, automatic labeling. So I think a lot of this is referring to putting quantified values on certain things, quantification, visualization too. So principle number 4, multimodal neuroimaging. Now, multimodal neuroimaging is not multimodal medical data, where you would have imaging plus a blood test plus CSF. These are 2 different imaging modalities. So in A, you have PET scan CT. In B, you have 3D, 4D. Now, a 4D is 3D in real time, as time component, with the reconstruction algorithm. And then in C, it's a little bit older, 2018, FDG PET. So this is fluorodeoxyglucose PET. It's a standard PET for glucose metabolism. PET CT, PET MR. So you're getting the advantages of these different technologies. Now, principle number 5 is interesting because EEG has helped usher in this more complex MRI, PET, CT approvals. Now, Enzo Data used it to automatically score sleep. BrainScope used it for brain trauma, and then Persist used it for spike detection and seizure detection. Now, if you've ever looked at an EEG, you glance up if you're at the hospital, they're just spikes, right? It's the electrical information coming from the synapse in the brain. Now, it's and that's why everything's going towards MRI PET. There are interesting things you can deduce from EEG, but basically you don't see too much of it, especially in recent approvals. Now, principle number 6, receiving lower X-ray exposure is a huge thing while improving high contrast spatial resolution. So this is an AI ML, likely software approach. And it says it could decrease exposure to patient and operator in the same room. And then you see the Canon Medical Systems, and these are all 2019, providing volume sets of entire organ increases contrast. Now, with all these principles, it's important to note that sometimes, things phase out just a little bit. But sometimes, if you have something that is established, maybe you see less of it these days and more of other types of approvals. And then, number 7 is hospital triage and planning. So this is basically getting a quick information from a patient, computer-aided triage and notification for CTA images. This is like angiography, so CT for the head, rapid pulmonary embolism triage and notification, preoperative surgical planning. So that's the thing. If you search through these 192 that I selected, there's a lot with planning and triaging. It's not just directly just a single thing that you're, seeing better off of an image. Now, in specific, as this moves to quantum, there's a decent number of articles out there. So I've shared this, so deep learning reconstruction algorithms. So this first one by Seth Lloyd, 1A, exponential speed up with QML in specific cases. They didn't mention if it was deep. It's just waiting for the hardware, right? And that was back in 2020. Now, Zhang et al. Said fluctuation of images is reduced due to deep learning. So this is all, imaging. And you can see in 2, this important automatic segmentation is that there are steps being taken. These papers are relatively recent. This Konar et al. Quantum-inspired neural network for brain lesion segmentation, Chudary. Quantum-inspired algorithm for multi-level segmentation. Principle 3, reduce MRI size with adequate performance. So this paper, it was published by NIST, and it's just an article on their website, is they envisioned this miniaturized MRI-like diamond tip sensor. It's a quantum diamond sensor that instead of using a full body MRI or anything like that, is just bringing it close to the proximity of the patient. And it seems some years, but there's been other findings. Is basically if you bring quantum sensors a lot closer to the body, even if the quantum sensor is not awesome or as good as the previous quantum sensor, it makes up for it in proximity, being close to the patient. Now, Fermilab is probably the one leading all of this. They're building a quantum computer, quantum sensors for MRI analysis. So this can entail many things, and it likely will. But it's a huge feat, just building their own quantum computer too. Now, principle 4, multimodal neuroimaging. I wasn't able to find too much in that. And again, just trying to get the original quantum computer to work, on a single modality, like a single MRI, say. Now, 5 and 6, haven't found too much with. Now, 7, what this reminded me of, kind of like the planning, a little less triage as far as patient data, is it's D-Wave. So D-Wave, and they just had this huge conference this week, I think in Miami. Basically what they found is that, you're using quantum annealers for optimization. So this is for nurse-physician scheduling. And a lot of these things remain proof of concept because, yes, they get a good value, but the argument is can a conventional computer, especially with quantum annealing, do it better? But there's many, if you watched any of that, and we could discuss this a little bit later, as there's many applications that they have with huge companies Lockheed Martin bought the first annealer in 2011. So it's to keep an eye on, because this week they said that they're pushing off any type of gate-based superconducting qubit till I think at least to 2030, something like that, 7 to 10 years later. Now, it's important to see that in all of these is that it's a direct comparison. A breakthrough in quantum hardware can lead to breakthrough in quantum medical imaging. So you have this huge potential for medical big data. Which of these technologies will survive? And is it ISO, IEC? Will they limit certain types? I don't see more than 3 for medical in all these things. So basically, in all these things, improve speed, scale, and quality forecast for IPM. And basically getting more sophisticated as quantum advances. Now, I published this before. These are the so I showed you that example of a single one. Well, this is going through the 10 most recent FDA AI/ML medical device approvals and listing the individual regulatory agencies that codes that are needed for each of these. So you see the CFR is the government code, but ISO, IEC I've been talking about. Now the NEMA is more for electronic components, and the ASTM, you see there's only one. So I haven't found quite as many with ASTM, but you'll see some ANSI and some other ones too that they'll kind of mention. Now there's this thing, after looking at the breakthrough devices in Alzheimer's these 2 for CSF and blood, I did a thorough investigation, and basically what it comes down to is yes, the blood test and the CSF will likely have some type of screening, but in all of them that I've seen, they always require, if they're exclusionary and no other test is required, they don't need neuroimaging, or they don't need CSF, for instance. But if it's inclusive, saying that they do exhibit symptoms of, or the effects of Alzheimer's, then they'll have to go on. And medical imaging, you're looking at the brain. Now the brain is like, close to 100 billion neurons. It's close to 100 billion glia. You have interactions between the glia and the neurons that form human consciousness and thoughts and memory. So I don't see, the primary aspect as far as it relates to Alzheimer's going away due to the complexity of the brain, even though it may exhibit effects a little bit later than what you could see in blood and CSF, cerebral spinal fluids. And then I went over this a little bit last week, and basically it kind of summarizes what I've been talking about. Now, the big push is basically for licensing, subscriptions, and or partnerships, kind of getting all this feedback from all these top companies in the world. And it's just like, who should you partner with? And then for me, my job is to make it clear and transparent. That's i.e. making abbreviations for things. Now, basically in medical experts and quantum experts, in my opinion, research and development efforts should begin as soon as possible due to its growth potential. The industrial engagement in quantum medical imaging, there's 2 of these papers I previously knew of, and then another one I just found. But basically you're talking about one of the leaders, Roche, even though that they do all this stuff and clinical drugs, and they do blood tests for Alzheimer's, they have a paper for quantum medical imaging. So in one of these papers, it's a quantum convolutional neural network to classify. So it's typically in these, at this stage, binary classification, and they look at things such as like pneumonia. I think there's one for retinal. The second one, quantum neural network, and then I don't think that's convolutional. It's just a standard QNN. And then the third one, deep QNN classification, that's an IEEE paper. But basically in all this is that there's no reason not to start, with programming and code on the medical and quantum side, because there's just billions of dollars from government to all these big other hardware players continuing to try to make the computer better, which is the principal component to getting better results. And then I went over this a little bit before, but basically this is that kind of thing. The best thing to do is the title slide. is, you have quantum machine learning, quantum neural networks, and then quantum convolutional. Now the convolutional has convolutional and pooling layers, but basically, those are shallow. So you'll get into deep learning if you have basically over 3 hidden layers. Now, some of these is basically, this is research. So this is basically growth potential. So this is looking at so the first one is mostly quantum sensing. The rest of this is basically in the blocks. It's machine learning that's in papers or, that's been developed. And keep in mind, a lot of these things, you have quantum transfer learning, replacing certain parts. And at the bottom, kind of like, you'll see quantum generative adversarial networks, kind of like the federated learning. That's, these kind of papers that have been coming out. And this is more regulatory. So this is a 101. So if, say for instance, IEC and ISO appear to have, things under control with cybersecurity. And then, as things go into other fields such as medical. And this is more of the breakthrough device. So this kind of tells in specific of, say, for instance, with the cerebral spinal fluid, it's not a standalone test. A likely positive result does not establish a diagnosis of AD. And then in 2, this is basically Roche, for better ID of patients requiring further confirmatory testing, and you would need a subsequent PET scan or CSF. And this is where, basically all these things are going to benefit from quantum approaches likely in the future. And then, in my opinion, due to the complexity of many aspects of the brain, I think the potential for quantum advantage breakthroughs is higher for neuroimaging. So these are some of the products. And basically, this first step is Alzheimer's disease algorithm. And then I've gone through some of these before. And so basically a Q3 2023 this year is the goal to get the minimum viable product for a binary classification, quantum-based algorithm for Alzheimer's, so later this year. And then here's some of the justification behind it. So these different workshops, basically this is supporting neuroimaging, these first 2. And there's all these other developments, quantum machine learning and COVID, quantum machine learning, in imaging, quantum machine learning for the IBM Amgen is arthritis. So it's not just imaging, it's just many other people are starting to investigate that. And most papers just say that we needed the better quantum computer, which is, but at least they have their foot in the door, right? Getting the kinks worked out. Stage 2 is more like what I've been talking about, accelerated reconstruction, reconstruction being an image formation, reconstruction being a good component of today's FDA approvals. So this is the fundamentals of it all. It may face a little bit more regulatory than stage 1, but basically, this is if you want less blurry pictures, denoising, those types of things. And then in stage 3, it's basically taking these things combined, and this is what comes to mind as far as some of these, like the portable MRI as a system. So having a system later on that not only does better, Alzheimer's disease classification, and also at the reconstruction step, you're getting better images, so that feeds into better diagnosis, basically. Here's some of the supporting information for that. And then these are the driving forces behind quantum in healthcare. The organizations that are involved in the billions of dollars, if it's IBM putting in $20 billion into quantum and other technologies, President of the United States supports quantum, takes pictures with IBM CEO in front of a quantum computer with American flag in the background. So, hospitals, you have NYU Langone, you have Mount Sinai, it's been building up for sure. And then see, these are more of the QMLs. So some of these I touched on before, but basically the Roche QCware papers, medical image classification. And then some of these other ones that we're trying to go through with COVID, and the results were okay. And I would say that the papers are good and take definitely, study them. So here's a traditional pitch deck that's available. And then here's, for instance, some of the technology. This is Subaya et al. And then this, so I adapted based on it, but the big thing you'll hear about is quantum transfer learning. So it's basically this step right here where it says trainable quantum. Substitute that for a normal program where classical does the rest with a ResNet 34. And then, basically get your gains through that is basically, it's called fine tuning. Now, in AD clinical trials, imaging is relied on pretty heavily because they have to monitor the patients over time. So there, PET tests, there's MRI tests, and sometimes they can exclude patients, say if it's MRI and they have metal stuck in their eye, they can't go in it. And then I believe they probably can't participate in the trial. So it's baked into all of that. So it's, trying to figure out these kind of the intricacies of, neuroimaging to go further into quantum. So this is the chart that explains that. Is basically, if you look at MRI, contraindications, change from baseline, these types of things that show up in imaging is when you're taking a drug for a clinical trial, they have to prove its safety and efficacy over time. And that's a lot of it's how it's monitored. Keep in mind, there's still some CSF and, potentially blood tests, but big trials and needing the validation through a medical image. And then, so with this, you see Google Cloud, Health Lake, NVIDIA, all huge announcements in medical imaging. This is to make the radiologist job easier, although the radio job, they're losing their numbers in hospitals, basically. And, Alzheimer's Association takes a lot of resources in order to treat patients. 2021, 270 billion, last year, 320 billion. And you see they're forecasting in 2050, nearly $1 trillion will go towards the cause. Here's some of the organizations. I kind of do advocacy for one of them. And then here's Nature's View. So basically, this is what's going on. So if you see the big thing, it's called amyloid, beta PET scan, or you have like a tau PET scan. Those types of things. It's the kind of the molecular aspects of what's going on in the brain. And basically, I summarized some of this, but basically the first part is an Alzheimer's disease algorithm. This is Q3 this year, and that's the call to action is to start putting this into play. There's several cases of medical imaging and basically in these foundational steps. B is more reconstruction algorithm. C is a combination, and D is setting up for an FDA submission and kind of looking over the IEC and the ISO, how regulatory will play out there. And the mission statement is basically to get the, better sensitivity, signal strength, and or resolution combined with advanced analysis in neuroradiology for Alzheimer's disease, the #1 cause of dementia. Now, this I included here. So 102 companies shaping the quantum computing landscape. There's a number of these that keep popping up, and I just I had no idea that there's, on the hardware side, yes, and we could discuss this a little bit later. But basically, this is through CB Insights. I typically see these on LinkedIn, so I'll put the source. I'll also put the, the 192 of these, FDA AI ML medical device approvals that kind of filtered down to basically having the greatest, potential for quantum involvement there. And let's see here, we're gonna come. Yeah, I'd be happy to hear from everybody, and you should be able to come on. So this could be anywhere from, medical devices, AI ML, to the Qubits conference, the D-Wave conference. I think it's finishing up today if it's not already over. And, just that relationship between the two, between medical and quantum. Yes, and the recording will be up. Feel free to unmute yourself, or you can come on as well. I'll put this will be on YouTube. if I get a sec here, I'll shoot the link here too. So any questions, Tim or Ron?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So, what kind of jobs outlook would you be looking at for someone like me who's a physicist who's also interested in programming quantum computers and interested in medical devices?
Yeah, it's same thing with everybody. It's like, do you have a passion for that specific area? Is that what you study day and night? If it's me or anybody else, this is something that, basically you're bringing all that to the table and say like, oh, okay, yeah, I researched all this stuff. I write on that. I speak on that. I've published on that. Those types of things is where you're going to find, most likely it's based on your background, really. And then any other questions? I'm putting in the chat. So those are the YouTubes. I'll put the deck up too. I'd be interested, is anybody here coming from more of a, and you could go ahead and run.
Hey, Kevin. We're also, we're talking again about these regulatory agencies and FDA approval and this stuff. Now, FDA is usually providing approvals or certification like for medical devices or for complete systems. But I see in your information that they're connecting, AI, ML to these approvals. Is that just the technology that's in a system that they sign off on, or?
Yeah, it doesn't have to. It just says AI ML medical device approvals, and this goes back to I think 95. So especially the more recent ones. Well, say for instance, like GE, they'll come up with a specific ultrasound algorithm, deep learning, and the very next post or approval will be the system for that algorithm. So it may, as far as like, can that algorithm run on other devices? Not sure. But yeah, it's a bunch of stuff, and there's definitely some trends, over the years, starting off with an original, more of the EEG, and then these days it's a lot of CT, a lot of ultrasound. You'll see a lot of general purpose ultrasound. Some have a specific purpose, but they'll go over everything. They're typically not used too much for like the brain, like the kind of like the high analysis. I think just for basically like angiography or blood vessels, those types of things. But yeah, it really just depends on the submission, because that's what I'm finding. So you can have a reconstruction algorithm, you can have segmentation, you can have systems. So there was a lot of systems, MR systems, and it'll go through phases where there's like pre-Tesla MRI, and you'll see a lot of other these kind of the MRI systems in the surrounding approvals. So things go in phases, I would say.
Yeah, but I just wondering if there's any clarity there as to, like, I know they provide approvals and certification on final product. It's what GE needs before they can sell a MRI to a hospital, right? They need the sign off on the whole system. But I mean, is the FDA really providing I guess there's sub authorizations or approvals for algorithms? And if we're talking about machine learning, are they actually looking at your machine learning stack and the hyperparameters and all the crap that goes in? They are looking at that stuff.
Yeah, so I put it in a post. I'll put the link of the, so this is basically the 500 plus of their final decisions. So for continuously learning algorithms, they have a couple things. They have abbreviations. It's basically getting up to, it's called, GLP, good lab practices. Well, this is good machine learning practices, GMLP. So, they have these two other protocols that, continuously learning algorithms need to meet. Oh, I think one of them is ACP, Algorithm Change Protocol. So that's if they go to change. So yes, these are final decisions, but at that same time, they have to, they're evolving, they're learning, they're getting better. And there can be detriment as far as, it's usually not bad, but if you start the same algorithm on two different patients in two different parts of the country, you get different initial results as you would expect from anything learning. And then over the time, I think things might kind of like even out.
Okay, I mean, have you gotten any feeling as to what these entities are submitting to the FDA for approval on a machine learning stack? I mean, it seems to me that you got to submit the data, your test and validation, and or your training, your test, and your validation sets that you use. But it's like, how do you prove this thing is worthwhile unless you're using live data after the fact? And so I'm just wondering, is like GE, they've come up with this thing, they have to submit all the data that they use to train their model and the hyperparameters that they settled on to the FDA, and what do they just do, run it? Or
Yeah, I mean, the prevailing thing is
crazy.
There's a couple of things. So it's probable benefit over probable risk going into it. And the thing you'll hear about more is it substantially equivalent to a predicate device. Now, predicate device is something that already exists. And I've seen it, say for instance, the very first of these, if it's like 521, the very first AI ML in 1995, it was a 510K submission. So that means that, what's the predicate device to an AI ML for the first submission? So, I think they're somewhat flexible. It's just basically the end result to the patient. Is this going to harm the patient? Can it? How understandable is it? The first deep learning algorithm was 2017, and it was by Arterys, and it was cardiovascular, so heart. And that one in specific, kind of set the stage for some things. But I've read in other papers, say like a Nature paper, that they were saying that not a lot of the deep learning algorithms were going through because of the opaqueness, not transparency. If a medical doctor wanted to understand the results of it. So the big push, besides these 7 principles, is going to be explainable AI, where you have a developer that can effectively communicate with the, say, neuroradiologist or imaging specialist, and then you start there, and then so you're working on your code, and by the time it's done and you get the result that the confirmatory test that it's positive or negative, can you understand how it came to that conclusion? So those are the next kind of steps. It's called XAI, or explainable AI. These are good questions. Any other questions? Anybody else we haven't heard from? Bahar, Murat, or Asmita?
No, thank you, Kevin. It was great and very informative as always.
Yeah.
Hi, Kevin.
Yeah, go ahead.
Am I audible? Yeah. So basically, when we talk about the quantum ML, right? So like just a quick question, because I'm a data scientist and I'm from IT. So wanted to know like whether whenever we are applying all these algorithms in the form of drug discovery, are we actually applying the optimization types of problems? Usage of quantum computing, you mean the algorithms and all the hardware stuff? Is it all actually the output for optimization?
Yeah, well, as far as like what's working the best right now, it's usually the quantum annealing. Now, it typically does, just optimization. I think it can do one other thing, but, they have to make approximations in order to get a result that makes sense. So say, for instance, like if you have a 3D molecule, you flatten it into 2D, and then you're not looking at, say, like the whole system and, say, if it's a whole protein, you might be looking at like little residues, amino acid residues, those types of things. But the thing that I've heard that kind of makes sense is the client or somebody in industry will be, demanding or requesting some aspect of a part of what's going on, and then they provide them with that service because they know molecularly, they know how to use a quantum computer. There's a lot of companies. I don't think I put it in this deck, but there's like at least 9 different companies that are associated with quantum and drug discovery. It's huge. So yeah, it's sometimes, most of them I see, but I haven't studied it like I'm studying medical imaging right now, is they're typically using some form of annealing. If you look on D-Wave's website, they have a company called Menton AI. It's a separate company, but they use quantum annealing. Quantum annealing's being used for a lot of the kind of like the practical applications, not super high performance, but they're getting a bump, right? And it just depends on the application. It could be 3%, something like that. Everybody out there wants the awesome quantum computer, but typically what you see is, your IBM, Google, Rigetti, is that they're still, maybe not quite there, and especially for something like drug discovery, even though they're theoretically more powerful.
Sure. Thank you, Kevin. Thanks for this awesome session. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Then Ron?
I just wanted to add to that, to what you have explained. A lot of the optimization programs that are out there are benefiting from quantum in one way or another, or via something called a variational quantum eigensolver. If you're in sync with linear algebra and linear mathematics and matrices and all that good stuff, you'll know what finding eigenvalues and eigenvectors are. These are at almost everywhere you go in this optimization business. You find something that's trying to solve for an eigenvalue, or so there's a quantum algorithm that helps you accelerate that process. It's not a magic calculation. You basically find it iteratively by running the VQE and then running like an amplitude or an amplitude amplification function inside your quantum computer, and you do this until you're satisfied that you have results that are close enough to where they need to be. So this whole business of iterative VQE and followed by an amplitude enhancer maps very well to the annealing machines. They actually so that's probably why you find a lot of the people that are doing work with optimization tasks, whether it be routing trucks or scheduling nurses and doctors, are probably using the D-Wave service to get in these days. It's just a tiny improvement in performance. So
yeah, and I don't think it's, it's definitely a real thing. Like I said, the Lockheed Martin $10 million in 2011. There's like, I think USC, they just picked up a annealer, and again, it's just a very specific thing. And as far as I know, it's a different coding. Now, I don't know if anybody watched the Qubits conference this week, but basically they said significantly better coherence. Now, in annealing, they kept pushing off because I think they said by the end of last year they were going to announce something about gate-based superconducting. But one of the gentlemen went up at the stage and he said, not for another 7-10 years, something like that. So it's pretty much all annealing for them. I think just the way the industry is moving around them. But if you can't find anything else that works today as well as you want, that's worth checking out. I don't know if somebody could check that, but basically, is it going to be a lot better annealing? And then is it worth doing some type of optimization with that? And that's that's just what they do. They don't really have too many other competitors, just like Fujitsu.
Yeah, well, I'm sure D-Wave understands that it's in their best interest to have a hybrid quantum, not hybrid quantum classical, but a hybrid quantum this and quantum that, because the annealer is good at certain algorithms. The superconducting qubits are probably better at other algorithms where you need more instantaneous discrete answers. So, I mean, it makes perfect sense to me that they're looking at that as making it available,
Yeah.
from their platform. So
And that's a company with interesting history. So going back to 2000, they were originally trying to get a gate-based superconducting computer to work. And I think about after a year, they gave up. And at that same time, and similar to that last slide that I showed, CB Insights has a graphic for this, that they were one of the few to make it out of that generation. Most other companies, except for I think ID Quantique was around 2000. But I would say the competitive advantage for them is, that they've seen many, many things in quantum. They have many funding rounds. So that says something too, that, people continue to believe in the technology. But it's, it's just one of those factors, and you have to keep an eye on everything, not just, just one specific type of technology. And maybe the leg up is the ion trap, in literature, I would say with Quantinium and IonQ, that they're actually doing stuff that, would make sense to do with this, somewhat powerful quantum hardware. So, but yeah, probably after this, I mean, like, as far as the news coming out, nothing much. I think the first week of January, and we start to hear some stuff, second week. Now in spin qubits, these are semiconductor spin qubits run you take semiconductor materials coming off a regular line, like to make this laptop, but instead you're using, spin qubits. Now the phys.org paper said it could mean billions of qubits. That's the first time I've heard that term. I've heard millions of qubits. So I looked at the paper, and one of these, especially it reminds me of a 2020 quantum paper. It's just super technical. Only somebody in that specific area could really understand it. But hey, maybe they intended for that. With a lot of these, you'll get a kind of consensus in your head, and then you'll hear something about neutral atom that just, somebody else will post on, and these 4 companies, those types of things. But, getting to that killer application. By the way, for those of you, ChatGPT, the current one out 3, I think it's got it's going to have, say, 1 point something trillion parameters. I think it's this summer. And they're saying, Microsoft came out on LinkedIn, they said that it's going to start incorporating quantum. So, and it makes sense because their very first chat box says, how does a quantum computer work, or how does quantum mechanics work, if you go to ChatGPT. But ChatGPT is being listed as an author on scientific papers. And, it's been banned in, anyway. So with all this is that there's going to be new rules and regulations, especially medical too. It's highly regulated. And then as far as what makes sense for, a chatbot to do in writing a certain paper and those types of things, and, especially like the quantum effects with it and dealing with more parameters, those types of things. But there was a couple weeks ago, I featured a paper, it was Alzheimer's disease, and there was 2 options. You could do original one, so you could take the Alzheimer's disease speech, and then you look at the tones and variations, just like how I'm talking right now. Now, the other aspect is using ChatGPT, is they took the audio recordings of these patients, either with or without Alzheimer's disease. It was, identified, classified at that point, and then they just turned it into text, and they said they got better results like that. So Microsoft gave them a big deal. Google announced that they're coming out with an equivalent or a similar product. So it's something definitely to keep an eye on. I'd be interested in some comments here.
Well, I know I've heard rumors that GPT-3 is not free to use. You have to spend money on it
Yeah, there's
to
three or
incorporate it.
there's DaVinci is the biggest one. It gets you all the parameters. There's 2 or 3 other ones too. But yes, the cheaper ones that have less parameters are less expensive. I don't know what it is when you go to ask a question. Now, as Meta asked a question, will it handle any of the QML algos? You can ask it. It'll give you a quantum machine learning algorithm. It kind of cuts off in the medical, either that it doesn't know or, it's somewhat hazy right there. But yeah, you have to keep an eye on all this. Now, if you recall, the original chatbots, Siri, Alexa, those were based, and I think Ron was able to catch it last week, and maybe Bahar, that on previous other different chatbots for medical purposes. It's really it's that medical AI, or they call it AIM, artificial intelligence in medical. So yeah, you have to keep an eye on all this stuff because Nature's publishing, putting posts out on LinkedIn regarding it. Scientists don't know, what is that line between is this part created by this person or some other person? But yeah, it's very interesting. But any other questions? So any other questions, medical?
I saw a video on YouTube. It was released just recently. It was an interview of IBM's top quantum hardware guy, whose name escapes me at the moment. But he was talking about IBM's Osprey chip. And I have a question for this group. Does anybody know if that's actually been released? I mean, this was a recent video. It was published recently, and it sounded like they were just on the verge of releasing it. Does anybody else have any further information on that?
Yeah, I can comment. Does anybody else know? So basically, they also have Huron coming out this year. Now, Huron is a 133, and it's supposed to have a lot less error, better coherence, all that kind of stuff. The Osprey, like you, I haven't heard too much. Even if you go, do you program much on Qiskit?
Yeah, I pay attention to their channel and watch a lot of their videos. So the Osprey is in the 435 qubit bracket. But it just caught me off guard. Is because I've heard that name. I said, I thought you guys have put this into production already. But the way the guy was talking, it was like they're still they have 2 copies of it, and they're still trying to figure out what how to get it online and make it useful.
Well, they usually stick to the roadmap pretty well.
Yeah.
So I know the big plan for it was later this year is the modular aspect with dynamic circuits, kind of circuit cutting, is to use it to get up to 16,000 plus qubit modular quantum computer. And then I started hearing all this news about Huron, even though it's a lower qubit count, that people may prefer that. And the other thing that's kind of like taking everything by storm is I really think the whole dynamic circuits, these are fragments run on smaller quantum computers, is bigger news than what other people thought. There was an HPC Wire paper or article that said that they see that IBM's main goal might not be to get to 1 million qubits as opposed to just focusing on the circuit cutting. There's sacrifices to it, right? Running on smaller quantum computers, but maybe the availability, the sheer number of quantum computers, those types of things. But it's interesting because when I see other startups bigger than mine flying a good portion of their team up for IBM, and like it's this huge celebration. And the biggest news that we get out of it is the Osprey, you know, the 433, and especially the dynamic circuits algorithm approach to mitigating error. You know, it costs, it has a cost, you know, a performance decline, you know, in doing that. But yeah, it's all very interesting. What's the big question mark is the National Science Foundation, the 2023 practical quantum computer. They say it's from their funded startups. Now, I would say the biggest practical application we have is the Dell. So it's a simulator. They say it emulates, you know, quantum mechanics, but they say it's on their website, and it's like an enterprise solution, those types of things. But you know, with the news from D-Wave for these 3 days they had, you'll hear news from other. I was trying to think who else I saw on LinkedIn. With the Chat GPT, and then the Microsoft, you know, with the quantum computer, you know, being able to do that, that's kind of the future right there. Not just natural language processing, but, you know, you hear, because there's so many that are other quiet, you know, we haven't heard too much from Google. They just use their old quantum computer from 2019 and then improve it with quantum sensing and memory. But there's just so many other ones, because many people said this is the year for quantum. So
a couple of things the gentleman gave out on the Osprey was that it's still based on what he referred to as the heavy hex grid. So that's the same topology they're using, but he was really adamant and very excited about stating that every qubit is addressable. So I don't, and so there's a bit of information with its predecessor or whatever, but he chose his words carefully, because all the qubits have to be accessible, obviously, from the outside world that controls them. But what they still have to deal with is the fact that not every qubit can communicate directly with every other qubit like they can for trapped ions. The trapped ions is they can rearrange, they can make the trapped ions do their square dance, so to speak, and they can get any two ions next to each other. You know, they didn't talk about that, but then he went on to say the next thing they're working on is something called Condor, which is over 1,000 qubits, and he sort of suggested that was going to be you know, their current technology, it's laid out on a two-dimensional grid on a piece of silicon, right? You
yeah,
get the junctions and stuff. So he kind of alluded to the fact that Condor might be like three Osprey wafers somehow connected in the vertical dimension.
yeah.
So it'd be a three-dimensional grid instead of a two-dimensional physical grid. And boy, they've got some things to figure out if that's the direction they're going.
Well, I remember when they, and feel free to chime in, anybody else, when they announced the hex grid, and that obviously you lose performance, but they're gaining controllability. And it kind of reminds, I don't know, it's just like where everything's going with growing in 3D with transistors and conventional computing, because of the, you know, limits and gaps between transistors, those types of things. Now, I will say this, so we haven't talked about Quantinium. They have, with like 13 qubits in an ion trap, they get 8,000 quantum volume. So that's a measurement of qubits in the numerator and error in the fault in the denominator. And I think it was, who's called? Oh, it was in Washington, D.C. They had somebody on, and they said their next goal is 80,000. So if that puts it like 130, and even IonQ's roadmap, they're not shooting for high qubits. They're still trying to fix it. You know, like the error, you know, better performance. that kind of stuff. Because even in imaging, so not so much if you were to simulate the brain, on an ion trap quantum computer, that you probably aren't talking hundreds of qubits for anything productive. But even in imaging, you could do bits and pieces of everything from reconstruction to segmentation, the specific parts of the codes that just, would run better on a quantum convolutional neural network. So I think that's kind of where it's at with imaging. It's gate-based, and then, it's hard to tell because we haven't talked about photonics. I saw a map and they kind of put photonics a lot far out as far as like application. And then neutral atom, I still haven't gotten anything as far as like what programs you can run, but I know in specific you can run programs interchangeably between ion trap, keeping in mind that the qubit connectivity is different between the two. But that's where it's at, right? Like you have to start somewhere, and it seems like you have to have things that run quantum programs, right, to get anywhere in at least this year, or have run quantum programs.
Yeah, you mentioned Quantinuum at the last Washington D.C. thing. Yeah, I had a nice chat with Dr. Catherine Spendier.
Oh yeah.
And I've connected with her. Hopefully she'll have some input for me. So her talk was about Quantinuum's ticket, like she pronounced it, multi-layered software platform for quantum computing. And I had no idea there was so much to it. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I think it's all open, isn't it? All open
Yeah,
source?
it's all open, and man, a lot of the things, I mean, it's probably every bit as complex as the Qiskit stack. And the Qiskit stack is pretty involved. I mean, there's at least 6 layers to the Qiskit stack between your Qiskit program and the actual hardware. And those other layers have to do with routing qubits and noise mitigation and optimization and all this other good stuff. But although Ticket doesn't get to that level, they allow you to you can bring code in from most any quantum language that's out there or framework that's out there, bring it into their environment and do a whole bunch of cool things, and then export it to pretty much any hardware that they support, which is pretty much all the major players. So I was under the impression that a Ticket was just another quantum language, but no, it's just massive platform. It's pretty crazy, pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, and I spoke to somebody that's knowledgeable in this area, and they say you could do the same code on ion trap and then something else that runs better on superconducting, and you can compare all this a little bit. Like, so Amazon Briquette, they have pricing. So pricing is per shot. So per shot right now, the most expensive is the IonQ ion trap, and then QEra, which I think is neutral atom. They are the same price as that. So I don't know if that's a reflection of demand, because it could incorporate other factors. So for instance, you have quantum annealing, orders of magnitude cheaper. And yeah, that's what it sounded like, is that, it's interchangeable. That's how it makes sense, right? Like if programs can already be run, gate based on 2 different types of hardware, does it make sense to keep going with the other ones that haven't seen any kind of like applications or software? But in all these things, everybody deserves a fair chance. And especially, I'm not quite sure, I think there's been some kind of gate-based movement with photonics. Now, spin qubits, the huge paper, the huge Nature paper, it's hard to understand. But I don't know, is that gate-based? But that's the big thing, right? Like, we've been designing code and optimizing it and cutting it into pieces for many years. Isn't that going to be the standard for whatever technologies can continue to do that as their hardware improves. So, you know, and all these things. Any other last questions? Or comments or things you're looking forward to in quantum or medical? I appreciate everybody coming on. Thanks everybody for the input. This will be up on YouTube. I'll put the deck, it'll be on LinkedIn. And, you know, I love the questions. I love the participation. Enjoy the rest of the night and enjoy the rest of your week. Take care, everybody.